Okay, Amanda and John, thank you guys so much for joining us. It's exciting to have you here.
Yeah, good to
Yeah.
be here.
Thanks so
Good.
much.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this conversation. One of the things that we've noticed about Uplift and the work that you and your team do is that you take sort of like a harmony approach to everything. And when I say harmony, I'm referencing Brian McLaren's sort of framing of stages of faith. It's one that's really stuck with me. And I actually looked this up just before we started recording. We did an episode with Brian McLaren about his stages framing. It's episode number 67. If anybody wants to look that up to like get a little bit more clear on what we're talking about when we do reference those stages. But in harmony, which is Brian's sort of fourth stage, um, what typically happens is that someone or an institution or whatever it is will integrate all of the previous stages. Far from rejecting them, it's saying how do and his four, as he frames them, are simplicity, complexity, perplexity, harmony. And what's beautiful about this, and I think this is true of all good stages work, is that the later stages transcend but include, or transcend and include, I should really say, the previous ones. And that's something that you do so well in every topic that you explore. And so for this conversation about Easter, the question that sort of was bubbling up for us is how could one take, or how could a family take a harmony approach to Easter that does include all of those stages, because it seems like it's becoming more and more necessary. Obviously, there's a difference between how kids might approach Easter and how adults might approach Easter. Families have all different shapes and sizes and colors and everything approaches, perhaps more than ever these days. And so that harmony approach that allows for everyone to find meaning together, I think is really important. So let me just ask, with that preface, I'll just throw this first question out there. What could a harmony approach to Easter look like? And maybe Amanda, I'll just throw it to you first.
Okay. Um, yeah, so first I'll say yes to a harmony approach to all ways of gathering, all ways of celebrating. And there's a way with kids, especially, that we can enter into conversations where we allow them to be in their stage of development, allow each child to be in their own exploration, in their own stage, and include all of that. So, in a holiday like Easter, where there's so many layers, there's so many ways to approach it, there's so many ways to see it and interpret it, we can be in a conversation that allows everyone to get what they need, to get the nourishment from the way we gather and from the conversation that we need. So one of the ways we do this is to keep in mind all those stages of development when we're creating lesson activities and ways to gather. So that might look like, for very young kids, it's a very, very concrete, simple, tactile conversations. And then as kids age, we can become more complex and more abstract and allow more space for inner exploration. And at the core of harmony, I think, is a centering and a privileging of relationship and connection. So no matter what the conversation looks like, we are connected in relational space to each other, which allows everyone to be unique, everyone to be themselves, everyone to show up just as they are, but still connected, still apart, and still belonging to each other.
Love that. John, any thoughts to add?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Amanda said. There's just the idea of celebrating every person where they are, and that includes people who no longer believe. I would guess that many of your listeners, in fact, I know many of your listeners have big families, and some people in those families no longer feel comfortable with certain beliefs. And it's just a fact that, you know, this is a common occurrence. And so what can happen in those situations is that there can be this nervousness about going to tender, heartfelt topics, because it's like, oh, we don't know, we're kind of walking on eggshells. We don't want to say anything that would offend anybody. And the approach that we take is just bring it all. Just bring like your if somebody has like taken a deep dive into biblical studies and they have a complex view of religion, great. If somebody wants to tell the traditional Jesus story, great. Like let's bring all of these voices together and celebrate the multiplicity of perspectives. And the reason to do that is exactly what Amanda is saying, that then you can get into heartfelt relationships. You can have a transformative experience as a family. You don't have to just cater to we're just going to make this about the candy aspect of Easter, which is fine in and of itself too. It's another perspective that should be celebrated. But what can happen is that Easter can become just about the candy because we're so nervous about offending each other. And we kind of reject that idea. We say like, no, you can have deep, heartfelt conversations in the messiness that is our current reality, where people have different perspectives.
I love that. Just intuitively feels so beautiful to me. Like it feels like a lot of the heavy lifting would really just be leaning into that intention. And that feels like a relief to just say it is okay to not all be on the same page, and there can be this real mindfulness around connection. But maybe you can take us into some of the specifics. Like if we're really going to get into the layers in around Easter specifically, what could that actually look like for a family?
Yeah, there's so many layers to Easter. One is the core story of the death and resurrection of Jesus. And so we take the position that no matter what you believe about that story, that there's something there for everybody universally. And then there's like the layer of it being tied to the Jewish Passover. You know, Easter is known elsewhere as Pascha, related to Passover, and it only became a distinct holiday celebrated on a separate date after a decree from Emperor Constantine around 300 AD. You know, and then there's like the layer of biblical studies. It's complex and debated. You know, I tend to be a big fan of like John Dominic Crossan, Marcus Borg, Cynthia Bourgeot, Richard Rohr, you know, Dan McClellan in our own tradition of people who are diving into the nitty gritty of the Bible stories. Then there's the layer of like the German Lutherans who brought the Easter bunny and Easter eggs. You know, when they immigrated to America, you know, even though decorating eggs was a pre-Christian tradition, it came through, you know, these German immigrants. And so that's part of like the American experience of Easter. Then there are like contemporary cultural pressures where Easter is an industry, you know, like consumer products and candy. And again, we celebrate that. It's one layer. I think that if that becomes the only thing that Easter is, it can feel like a pretty empty holiday. But we don't need to reject that layer. We don't need to reject any of the layers, including that one. And then, you know, there's belief and hope and inner transformation, which I think is probably what we'll spend the bulk of our time talking about here.
Yeah. Let me ask a follow-up question on that last part, John. So like I think that, and this happens with Christmas too, right? Where there's this sort of like consumerist aspect to it that that takes things that don't really seem on their maybe on their face to religious people to be super meaningful. And so the approach that we take, and I don't think we take this too far necessarily, but like a very typical viewpoint on this would be like, this has nothing to do with like the quote unquote real meaning of Easter or the real meaning of Christmas. We're going to put up with it because that's the world we live in. But what we should be focused on, you know, in the case of Easter, Christ's resurrection, or in the case of Christmas, Christ's birth. And like, I wish we didn't have to, you know,
The
like
distraction.
deal with those distractions. And like, it's a fight sort of to say like, yeah, our kids, of course, are going to get sort of like wrapped up in all of that stuff, but we're trying to pull them back to understand the real meaning. It's interesting to hear you say that's a layer that we could celebrate. What does that mean? Like, why celebrate that?
I've spent a lot of my life as a parent being kind of grumpy about the commercial aspects.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
like being grumpy about candy, being grumpy about presents, having, you know, just the consumerist aspect of it. And just lately, the more that I've lived into this harmony perspective, I'm like, actually, I don't have to be grumpy about that. I can keep it in check. We don't have to go overboard. And I think it's not very helpful to be mindless about it, just to be like, oh, I'm just trying to amass as much candy as I can, and I'm going to eat it quickly, without thinking. I think there's something to saying, hey, let's be mindful about all of this. But I've kind of worked to, I should emphasize worked to, give up the grumpiness. It's like, no, it's great. Kids like it. It's fun. Just like wrap that in as part of the holiday. You don't have to be against any of the fun things. It doesn't mean that it clips any of the meaningful things. And in fact, the fun things can be the meaningful things. And so over the past, 5 years or so, I've really tried to soften that aspect and say like, no, just integrate it, harmonize it with all of the other layers. You don't have to reject it. So that's a little bit of how it's looked like in my life. And it's definitely been a part of what we've done at Uplift, which is, I think Amanda and Michelle have been better at this than I have. I've been more of the grumpy one when it comes to like, oh, let's get rid of this silly stuff. And it's like, no, the silly stuff matters. It's really important. And so it's led to a softening for me that I think has been healthy.
Amanda, as a school psychologist, I'm interested to know if you feel like they're like developmentally, these really tactile things associated with holidays can actually be a doorway for children to have something more meaningful.
Absolutely. Absolutely it is. And in fact, if I honestly reflect on Easter when I was growing up, a lot of the moments that come up are the Easter egg hunt, are the ways we gathered and celebrated and gathered around food. And a lot of the symbols of Easter, just these symbols of spring, of rebirth, of renewal, eggs and bunnies and all of that, they hold great meaning. They hold powerful meaning that lays seeds when we're very young to grow to be something more complex and more mature. And I do appreciate John's point of not rejecting completely. There's a tension that releases in my body when I say, I'm going to stop fighting this. I'm going to stop creating a battle about this and embrace it, but in a thoughtful and intentional and meaningful way. So just infuse the things that bring delight to children, infuse them with extra meaning, rather than be in a tension of, we're going to cut the silly stuff and we're only going to be reverent during this time. Because, our systems don't totally respond to that approach a lot of the time. And it's true with kids. We all work with kids. When their system is relaxed and open, that's when they're receptive to learning, to being in connection. So,
Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Since we're here right now, I'm curious if you want to talk about maybe some examples of how that infusion might look in the real world. What are some real ways to do that?
Yeah, I think it's a great time to talk about that. I think ways to do that are embracing the Easter egg hunt through all the different stages of my family and my kids, from very young to young adult to in religion to out of religion. The Easter egg hunt has remained through all of that. And it's a scavenger hunt with clues. And as my kids age, they would be involved in creating the Easter egg hunt. So that's something that's remained, that's something that's fun, and it's something to gather around. Planting seeds, I think, is a really powerful Easter springtime activity to do together, and gradually watch something come out of nothing. It's a powerful, powerful lesson. Nature walks, walks in nature where you see things that looked like they were dead spring new life. Just these small noticings can be really powerful.
Yeah, that really struck me when you said that, sort of regardless of your kid's age or stage or perspective on religion that the Easter egg hunt has stuck around. Like it's become part of my like internal framework for how to process the why of religion and the why of spiritual practice, to think about the symbol of the cross, the vertical beam being like connection to the divine, the horizontal beam being connection to other people. And in that way, and like you said, that's stuck around. Like that's bringing you, that Easter egg hunt is bringing you together. It's serving the purpose of that horizontal beam at the very least, in a really powerful connective moment that's going to like create true lasting memories. And it's like, wow, the Easter egg hunt, framed that way is actually sacred. It's something that is really powerful. Like I can think of very few other traditions that we do every single year, that brings the family together in that way. And everybody seems to be having a good time. Well, I guess there's some exceptions to a good time at the Easter egg hunt, but either way, we're practicing living together,
Yeah. Can you tell us, in the Jesus, well, I guess this is something that I really appreciate about Uplift, that very often you visit stories that are super familiar, but you pull out, somehow I feel like you give me sort of a fresh way to see these very familiar stories, and something about that freshness, like just hearing it in new language or hearing different aspects of the story that I'm not used to emphasizing it. It feels so much more meaningful, and maybe that's just because it's new. I don't know, but I'd love to hear about how you might do that with the Easter story. Like, what are some of the valuable things that you think maybe we could pull out that would help us have some fresh eyes about how this story can be meaningful?
Such a good question. And just the framing of the question, I think, is really foundational to the answer, which is like fresh eyes. There's a
Yeah.
concept in Zen of like beginner's mind, and you can make almost anything meaningful if you bring beginner's mind to it. So if you bring beginner's mind to even the Easter egg hunt, if you have a toddler in the family, what a wonderful gift that is to let them do the Easter egg hunt and just watch them first, like before anybody else goes. Let the toddler go and see what they do. And they will likely not just be rushing from egg to egg to egg. They'll see it and they'll like, be in awe of the egg, be happy, delighted by the egg, and just maybe even open it up right there. And just watching that, seeing that is like an instance of beginner's mind or fresh eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And if we bring that same mentality to the story of Jesus and the Holy Week, there are so many aspects that can be really transformative for us, and it will change over time. Lately,
Yeah.
for me, I've just been so in awe of the moments when Jesus takes risks in the Holy Week, during the Holy Week. Like what I asked the question of myself, like what led to his crucifixion? It wasn't just like an abundance of niceness, though I think Jesus was nice, he was kind, but it wasn't just that. It wasn't like, oh, he exceeded this threshold of kindness and now we need to crucify him. It wasn't anything like that. It was like speaking what was divine, and not allowing fear to shut him down, not allowing fear to paralyze him. And so I felt that personally, just seeing the Jesus story through fresh eyes of like, how can I be a little more bold in saying what is really the divine speaking to me? How can I say things from that place? How can I speak as one having authority and imitate Jesus in that way? The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard says that any Christian is an imitator of Christ. That's what it means to be a Christian, is to imitate Christ. And so that's one thing that stood out to me in recent years. But that's just me. I mean, anytime that you tell the story and you say to your kids, like, listen to this with fresh ears, see this video that we're going to watch of the story with fresh eyes, it opens into new conversations, that it taps into what's alive for each person. You can tell the same story every year at Easter. Tell the Easter story, and it's going to pick up in new ways at each stage and at each age and each place that each person is in.
Yeah, I love that. Amanda, do you have any examples? I really like that, John, and I'm curious, Amanda, if we keep going just on the subject of fresh eyes and maybe giving examples, like what in recent years has been meaningful for you about the sort of that story of Jesus's last week and crucifixion and resurrection?
I think when it comes to children, a way to infuse the concept of resurrection with new life and new meaning is pairing it with the life cycle of a butterfly, which is really remarkable, going from caterpillar to chrysalis. And there is a liquefaction in that chrysalis. This being dissolves into nothing and becomes something completely new. That is resurrection. I mean, it's a powerful, powerful example from nature for children that is so ordinary and mundane. Every butterfly a child sees has experienced this complete dissolving, this kind of death. So I think pairing that story, which can sometimes feel so out there, this God-like being that happened so long ago, it can feel so larger than life. Pairing it with something so simple from nature that we encounter all the time. And seeing, oh, this is what life is. This is what life is. It's changing our form. It's letting go. It's dying. It's being reborn again and again. Yeah, I think that can be a really powerful coupling with that story.
Yeah, that's been a really meaningful part of it for me too. And I've been thinking about this more over the past, I don't know, like 18 to 24 months maybe, where I am reminded of when Jesus is asked for a sign, and he says that the only sign you'll be given is the sign of Jonah. And I think that there's one reading of that where it's like, okay, so Jonah's in the whale for 3 days, and then he came out, and meaning like Jesus is going to be in the tomb for 3 days and then be resurrected. And I've been asking myself more lately, like what additional layers could there be to what Jesus was teaching there? And it seems true to me that when he's saying the only sign that you'll be given is that sign of life followed by death followed by resurrection, he's saying that there is sort of a universal pattern that cannot be escaped, that everything exists in those cycles of life and death and rebirth. And we see that all around us sort of inescapably. And I wonder too if that's why political ideologies that attempt to like hold on to something so tightly or even to go back to the past are so broken on a fundamental level, because they're denying this universal pattern that Jesus said the only sign we're going to get is the one where something lives and then it dies. And that's always tough. But there is a new resurrection. There is going to be another type of life. It's going to look different. But it and will be beautiful in its own ways.
I love that. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
I'd love to hear. So we're learning how to be parents to teenagers. We have a 16 and a 14-year-old. And I'm noticing that there are ways that we can have conversations that I feel like are very expansive and are waking my brain up and my spirit up. And I think I tend to, like talk at them, and I want to like tell them about my own insights and things I'm learning. And I can see that that's not as effective as, maybe it was never effective. I don't know, but it feels like there's something happening with their teenage brains that's not so interesting to them. And so I'd love to just hear, maybe just from a developmental perspective, how can we do this with teenagers or older kids? Like, how can we help them to find something meaningful about this, like these rituals and this consistent annual celebration? Like, I would love for them to be having those big thoughts, to be thinking about transformation in their own lives. And so is it about engaging them with questions and like letting them do the work of wondering, or I don't know, what does that look like? What does that look like for a big kid?
Well, first of all, your kids are right on time. That's exactly what they're supposed to be doing, is
Okay.
starting to distance themselves from from learning from you, and they're widening. They're learning from their peers. They're learning from the outside. So good job, teens. And at the same time, even as they begin to individuate, I think creating opportunities for conversations is still important. I think it's still important that they hear your voice and they hear your perspective. Even though maybe on the outside it doesn't, maybe it doesn't look the way you might hope, but it's something is still happening. So yeah, I think creating the opportunities, keeping the rituals, but also just letting go of the outcome and letting go of the conversation, not holding on too tightly, I think is most helpful with, early and later teens.
But we can keep talking, you're saying. It sounds like, because like I do find myself sometimes holding back. It's like, I know how this is going to come off, and it's just like not worth it.
Yeah. And I think it's a polarity. I say emphatically, yes, keep on talking. And then we always, we can feel maybe sometimes when we're done talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, that polarity aspect is so critical to everything we do at Uplift. One of the polarities that I appreciate the most is listen and speak. Both. I think that it's so essential for every single relationship that we have, is that we have time to speak. I think that should never go away for a parent to have time to speak. And it should never go away for a parent to have time where you're just listening.
Yeah.
And so both of those things are so essential. One thing that I'll say when it comes to teens and Easter is related to hope. There are just a lot of studies that are coming out that show that teens are facing a sense of hopelessness, and it's gone up, in the wake of COVID, in the wake of many other things that we're facing nationally and internationally. Teens are losing their sense of hope, and Easter is a fantastic time to talk about hope, because it is a story of death and resurrection. It's a story of the idea that even in the bleakest moments, when it looks like it's the end, on Good Friday, and Christ is taken to the tomb, the story keeps going. And it keeps going even beyond when the story says that Jesus ascends to the heavens. That's just the genesis of the entire Jesus movement that flows from that. And so, and it continues going today. And so there's just there's this sense in the core of the story itself that what seems like an end is a beginning. And if a teen can learn that, I'm going through a breakup, I'm going through getting a bad grade, everything feels so hopeless. They might be feeling hopeless about, say, climate change or any number of things. Yes, and there's something beyond the sense of hopelessness. Like that's such a rich vein to explore on Easter. And I think it's a really important vein to explore, especially right now, for so many reasons.
There's a lot to dive into there. One thing that's striking me right now is that there may be parents listening to this and they're resonating with that polarity. Okay, it's listen and speak. And like they can speak, they can control that, but they're saying, they might be saying like, I want to listen, but I'm unable to get my kids to speak. And so I'm unable to listen. Do either of you have recommendations for somebody that finds themselves in that situation?
I think it's patience. And it's also not listening when we as parents are ready to listen. It's noticing and attuning to when our kids are ready to share and how they're ready to share. And it's not always in the moments that we expect. So I think there's a lot of patience involved. I can say in my work in school psychology with students, there have been some students that I've worked with for almost an entire school year before we actually started the quote unquote work. It just weeks of sitting together, engaging in different ways before their system was open and relaxed and ready to start sharing. So it would be amazing if there was a magical way to help our kids know it's safe, you can open up, this is the time, but they'll do it in their own time. That seems to be the rule of things.
I've definitely seen that I want to have these, formal conversations over a family home evening, or like, and they happen in the car. Like it's just never, it's never when I'm planning. But you've said this, what, Tim?
Oh, no.
Right.
Oh, okay.
The
Thank
car.
you. I was just gonna, well, I was gonna say, like, one of the things that has prevented me at times from, I think, being able to get somebody to talk is when I'm bringing some sort of an agenda to the conversation. Like, I think people in general, and this is like one of my soapboxes, I apologize. People have probably heard this a couple times, but like, I do think, people generally have very sensitive agenda detectors. And I think teens maybe more so than others. Like, they will sometimes see agendas where we think none exist, and so there is something about bringing true listening to that conversation and to that relationship, not just listening with a way, in the next speaking moment to get something across.
Yeah, it requires really deep trust that when the time is ripe for that to circle back to whatever you want to unfold, if it ever happens, that it will happen in its time. That you might have to listen to your kid talk for a dozen hours over the course of weeks about Minecraft, and that might be the thing that is like alive for them, and so, okay, here I am, I'm ready to listen. Oh, it's Minecraft again. Okay, I'm ready, I'm listening. I'm giving you my presence. Wow. I'm giving you attunement.
Yeah. And
then that eventually is like, oh, and this happened at school. Oh, really? Yeah. And then, going through that, did you feel a sense of hopelessness, or something? Then suddenly you're in the territory of talking about it. And you might have listened to a dozen hours about Minecraft and not getting that fruit at all. You just have you don't have a complete control over it. But that doesn't mean that you should stop speaking. It doesn't mean that you should stop listening. It just means that so many of these things happen on their own timetable, and we have to develop like a deep trust and patience that Amanda is pointing to, that it will resurface as time prepares for it to resurface. And then that transformation can happen in light of that.
What John is saying about trust reminds me of an experience I had when I had deep conflict and concern about a situation with one of my kids, and I was talking to someone I really trusted, and they pointed out very kindly that there is a whole field of love. There's a whole world surrounding my child. It is not all on me. I am not all powerful. Wow. I am not the only one that's helping this child grow. So the message was trust a little bit more, relax a little bit more, trust your child is becoming the way they will become. And of course, we show up to the fullest extent that we can, as present as we can, as willing as we can. And then we employ capital T trust and watch the process unfold.
Is that how you mentioned a couple of times, Amanda, about this idea of their system being open and what's the word? You're like, I don't know, open and relaxed enough to receive. Is that what they need to feel, or is it about the environment, or their biology if they're tired? Like what is it that makes their minds or their hearts able to feel receptive?
I would say yes to all of the things you just described. There is just this fabric of, John used the word attunement, which is when a parent or a loving presence is fully with them, heart open. A child is feeling felt, and they and they know that whatever they come with is okay. That we are regulated as parents, we're grounded and regulated, and that they can come fully with whatever they have. So there's that condition that we weave in from when they're just born, even before they're born. We try to weave in that presence and attunement. And then yes, everything you said, it's a mystery. We're born with different we're born with different frameworks, with different personalities, with different biology. And so those conditions for when we are open and receptive, it's kind of a mystery. And there are some patterns. One that you pointed to, you mentioned, it's not when I sit down and plan a formal conversation that my kids open up. It's on the drive to school when we're not looking right at each other face to face, and there's so much intensity. It's more relaxed. We're driving, we're both doing something. So on a drive, on a walk, sometimes in the evening hours, I can't count the number of parents I've heard say, right around bedtime, my kids are ready to talk and open up. And sometimes we say, hey, it's bedtime, let's hold to the schedule. And sometimes we relax into it and say, okay, this is when hearts are open. So this is what, let's sit down and chat. So yeah, it really is a mystery of when we're open to moments of transcendence and moments of connection. And it's often a hit and miss proposition, but we just keep showing up and trying again.
So I'm thinking about how I think someone may be feeling like, I want this this experience of the Easter season even to just be the most transformative, to feel the most connecting, to feel the most spiritually anchoring. And so I could imagine thinking, so I'm going to make it as sacred as possible. Like we're going to really focus on what feels to me as a parent like the most important aspect of this season. And I feel like maybe what you're saying is that part of creating that that whole environment around a kid that will be the most nourishing, part of that experience might mean that you're offering this sort of layered approach, because who knows like what they'll feel the most receptive to. And I love the idea that maybe all of that can be working together to create the connection and the nourishment, but that maybe like one single language or one single voice won't necessarily be the thing that connects them. Like, is that part of the reason that you take this layering approach? Because I would love for you to speak to someone who feels like, but it still feels like a compromise to do anything but, whatever feels the most meaningful to me.
Relationship and connection can't be a compromise. That's my instinct. That's my knee-jerk response to that. And yeah, as parents, just constantly coming back, rather than focusing on what do I want my child to do, to think, to believe, to feel, coming back to ourselves and saying, what's my intention here? Do I have an agenda? Just like Tim was talking about, what's my agenda? And can I just loosen that up and focus on connection?
Yeah, I want to come back to trust again, but I also want to tie trust to faith. When I think of faith matters personally, just the phrase faith matters, I think of this idea that we hold this really deep trust. It's tied to what Amanda was just saying, that as we turn toward the relationship with like open heart and love, it casts out fear, right? Perfect love casts out fear. And if we can keep holding that, on the surface, it might seem like a total mess. And it may very well be a total mess. But down beneath it all, there's this deep trust, this deep faith that as we return to love between us and our kids, between us and our spouse, between us and our extended family, as we return to love over and over and over again, we start to see like we're living from a place of faith rather than a place of anxiety. We're parenting from a place of
Wow.
faith rather than a place of anxiety. And that can make such a monumental difference moment to moment and throughout our entire lives, because our systems, like Amanda's pointed to, can just start to relax.
Yeah.
We don't have to have the perfectly manicured Easter, but we can make a heartfelt effort that might yield fruit in a car ride 2 months from now.
Yeah.
You know, we might say like, oh, that Easter was such a failure, but you gave your spiel about hope. And then 2 months from now, you're in the car and your kid turns to you and says like, what you said about hope has really stayed with me. Like, oh,
Yeah.
wow. I thought that was a wash. I thought that nobody was listening. I thought it was a waste of time. And here it is. We hear that all the time with people who do uplift lessons. They'll say like,
Yeah.
we did the lesson. And then, again, 2 months later, 6 months later, 9 months later, whatever it is, my kid returned to me and said, hey, in fact, this happened to me in my house. Dad, I'm so grateful that we did that lesson on bullying because it helped me at school. I had no idea he was really listening. So we just don't know. And so that's why we have to have this faith, this deep faith that something beyond us is at work and that it's going to be okay as we return to heartfelt relationship and love over and over again.
Wow. I really love that.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could turn for a moment to a sort of different situation where obviously a lot of Mormon families do bigger gatherings, like Easter in the afternoon and evening with extended family. I think it's true that there are very few families that in some sense today are not mixed faith families. Like people are very much bringing different perspectives to the table. Some, there may be in stages terms, there may be simplicity in the room, there may be complexity in the room, there may be perplexity in the room. And so like what are some ways that we can not just coexist, not just tolerate, and like keep things, fairly superficial in order to remain amicable, but what are ways that we can really connect across the spectrum of stage and belief in that situation?
I think that if nothing else, stories of family members can be a really good common ground. So this is again going back to relationships, but it fits in with Easter because you likely have ancestors or grandparents who have passed away. And so it's like, we're going to gather together and we're going to tell heartfelt stories about grandma who died, 5 years ago. And that some people might in the course of the story say, I'm so glad because of Christ's atonement that we'll see them again. And you might have other family members who are non-believing who might not say that, but the focus is who is right when it comes to the Easter beliefs. The focus is the stories of grandma and the hope that we can be united as a family. And so that's one portal, and that can even work with like coincide with the Easter egg hunt. Just to give a very practical, concrete example, is like put in printed out papers or just handwritten papers in the eggs that say like tell a story about grandma, or like one thing I like about you is, or one kind thing I want to do for you today is. And then the kids get the candy and then they also go through the papers and you do the activity as a family. So it's a portal into a really heartfelt, tender exchange where you can have a spiritual experience together. So that's one example.
I love that.
I don't mind looking.
Maybe the eggs could contain candy and the slip of paper.
Yeah,
I'm just
exactly.
imagining the
No, that's
situation where it's
exactly
just-
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I can see
Love
the
that.
kids walking around shaking it.
Yeah, exactly. Is this a paper
It
one?
has to be both. Has to be
Yeah,
both.
Yeah.
As with everything.
Or put
Yeah.
cash in it. So it's cash or
I like that. Yeah.
Either way. Anyway.
Yeah, and another thing that comes to mind for me is coming back to emphasizing the universal themes of Easter, of renewal, of hope, of resurrection, of love, and not as a way to in any way dumb down or dilute anyone's message. Everyone come fully with what that renewal means, of what hope means to them. But not losing sight of these themes and values that connect through all of the different lenses, through all of the different layers. And when there is a mismatch of belief or a mismatch of the way renewal or rebirth or resurrection is interpreted, it's also a good chance for conversation with kids, and to just let them express, what was that like for you to hear about your aunt's belief or non-belief? How did that feel? What was that like? What do you think?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I'm like so excited for how to do it this way. When you said, Amanda, that you can just feel your body relax when you let go of, how you think this needs to go. Like I feel that so much, and this feels like such a sweet way to just lean into the love version of this holiday, I think. But I want to make sure that as we wrap up, that I want to just give you both the last word. And is there something that you'd want to leave the audience with? Is there making plans for their Easter weekend and family gatherings, and just any last thoughts?
I would say something that comes to mind for families wherever they are in belief, is just the importance of infusing our family lives with that which is meaningful and spiritual and connecting. Uplift is influenced a lot by Lisa Miller. She's a researcher and clinical psychologist out of Columbia University, and she's done extensive research about how spirituality impacts children and their development. And she emphasizes how seasonal rituals are powerful psychological anchors for kids throughout childhood and into adulthood. So having some form of spirituality, which can be separate from religion. Spirituality and religion don't have to be the same, although they can also overlap. But that having an infusion of spirituality provides a lot of benefits and protective elements against depression. It increases children's resilience. So I would just emphasize to not throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to gathering and being intentional and infusing reverence and the sacred in our family life.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would echo that. I have a personal longing for reverence that came from, what I would call a lengthy time in the perplexity stage, and feeling that lack of reverence, but yearning for it, yearning for a way to figure out how do I get back to reverence and spiritual experience when life is so confusing now, as I entered that stage. And so that yearning is really still in my heart very much. And so I just keep returning to that reverence. I'll share a quote from Cynthia Bourgeau, who's an Episcopal priest, and she says that Easter serves as the archetype for all our personal experiences of dying and rising to new life, reminding us that it is not only possible, but imperative to fall through fear into love, because that is the only way we will ever truly know what it means to be alive. And I just want to live life alive. That's the goal. I don't want to numb out. I don't want to just kind of cater to base consumerism. I want to live fully alive. And so I think one thought that I'll leave with is that you can ask your kids and you can ask yourself is, what do you think you might let go of or let pass away this Easter so you can be resurrected as someone new? So it's coming back to the stages and an idea that we're all developing, like the butterfly that Amanda pointed to. We are all letting things pass away so that we can be more fully alive. It's only when we grip them so tightly, we're afraid of death and we won't die, that we realize, oh, we're not actually fully alive. So we have to pass through this process of letting things go so that we can be fully alive, of losing life so that we can find it, right? And it's a powerful pattern that I think can work at every age and every stage, no matter who we are. I think it's a powerful question. How can we live fully alive? What can we let go of?
Wow. Thank you both so much. This has been incredibly powerful. And like Aubrey said, it's making me excited for next week, to actually put some of this into the practice. I think both of you have voices that are so important, so powerful on these types of questions. So thank you truly for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both so much.
All right, thanks so much for listening. We really hope that you enjoyed this conversation with John Ogden and Amanda Suarez. You can find more about Uplift Kids at upliftkids.org. And if Faith Matters content is resonating with you and you get the chance, we would love for you to rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. We read all of the reviews and we love to hear from you. You can also email us at info@faithmatters.org. Thanks again for listening.